The massive screen in Times Square flickered as my face appeared, larger than life. Next on CNN Business Leaders, how Eliza Chen turned a $4,000 investment into a $95 million tech company that's revolutionizing healthcare accessibility. My phone immediately lit up with notifications. Friends, colleagues, investors, all sending congratulations. But the message that stopped me cold came from my cousin Sophia. "Oh my God, Eliza, your mom is watching this with the entire family at the reunion right now. You should see her face." The family reunion I had deliberately skipped. The same reunion where, according to my sister's earlier text, our mother had spent 30 minutes telling everyone how I had wasted my potential and failed at life by dropping out of medical school 4 years ago. I stood frozen in the middle of Manhattan, staring at my phone, a strange mix of vindication and ancient pain washing over me. After years of fighting to build something meaningful despite my mother's constant criticism, the universe had delivered the most public validation possible, at the most ironic moment imaginable. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up as Dr. Diana Chen's daughter meant one thing. Excellence wasn't an achievement, it was the baseline expectation. My mother had immigrated from Taiwan in her 20s, put herself through medical school while barely speaking English, and built one of the most respected cardiology practices in Boston. Her story was legendary in our family, the pinnacle of the American dream, determination personified. As her only daughter, my brother Michael had wisely escaped the pressure by showing an early aptitude for sports rather than academics. I was groomed from kindergarten to follow her path. Piano lessons weren't about music but about discipline. Science fairs weren't about curiosity but about college applications. Every A- was met with the same question: what happened to the other points? By the time I reached high school, I had internalized her voice so completely that I no longer needed her actual presence to feel the weight of her expectations. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Princeton, and majored in molecular biology, checking every box on my mother's life plan for me. "You make it sound so awful," my college roommate Jasmine would say when I complained. Most people would kill for a parent who cared that much about their success. But it wasn't care, it was ownership. My achievements were her achievements. My failures were personal betrayals. When I was accepted to Harvard Medical School, my mother threw an elaborate party at her Beacon Hill home, inviting her colleagues, our extended family, and seemingly every Taiwanese American in the greater Boston area. I smiled through endless introductions as my daughter, the future doctor, while fighting the growing sense that I was walking into a life that didn't belong to me. Medical school itself was a special kind of hell. While I had the intellectual capacity for the work, my heart wasn't in it. I found myself drawn instead to the problems in healthcare that existed outside the examination room, the barriers to access, the technological inefficiencies, the systems that seemed designed to fail the people who needed help most. During my second year, I used my coding skills, taught to me by my father before his death when I was 15, to build a simple app that helped patients navigate insurance paperwork. It was rudimentary but functional, and watching actual people use it to solve real problems ignited something in me that memorizing anatomical structures never had. I started skipping classes to work on the app, justifying it as still healthcare related. My grades slipped from exceptional to merely above average. My mother noticed immediately. "What's going on with you?" she demanded during one of our Sunday phone calls. "Dr. Harrison mentioned you missed his lecture last week." Of course she was, friends with my professors. Of course they reported back to her. "I'm working on a project," I said vaguely. "Your only project should be becoming a doctor," she responded. "Everything else is a distraction." But the distraction was gaining traction. A local community health center asked if they could pilot my app with their patients. A tech-focused professor in the public health department offered to mentor me in developing it further. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something that mattered on my terms. Then came the fellowship offer. A prestigious tech incubator in New York wanted to fund the development of my app into a full-fledged platform. The catch? I would need to take a leave of absence from medical school. I still remember exactly how my mother's office looked the day I told her. The precisely arranged certificates on the wall, the family photo that was actually a professional portrait, the absence of any personal clutter. She sat behind her imposing desk, white coat still on, regarding me as she might have a particularly disappointing diagnosis. "Absolutely not," she said when I finished explaining. "This is a childish detour that will ruin everything we've worked for." "Everything I've worked for," I corrected. "With my guidance, my support, my connections," she countered. "Do you think you would be at Harvard without my influence? Without the path I cleared? I earned my place there. And now you want to throw it away for some app?" She practically spat the word. "Do you know how many Asian girls are trying to break into tech? They'll eat you alive. Medicine is respected. Medicine is secure." "This isn't about security, Mom. It's about creating something meaningful." "Meaningful?" Her laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Doctors save lives. What does your app do?" "It helps people who can't afford to navigate the system you profit from," I shot back, immediately regretting the anger in my voice. Something cold settled in her eyes. "You sound just like your father, always chasing some idealistic fantasy, instead of facing reality." The mention of my father, her using him as a weapon, was the breaking point. My dad had been a software engineer who died of a heart attack at his desk. My mother had always attributed his death to working too hard on meaningless things, rather than taking care of his health. That she would use him to manipulate me now was unforgivable. "I'm taking the fellowship," I said quietly. "I've already submitted my leave of absence paperwork." "Then don't come back," she replied, turning to her computer screen as if I'd already left. "If you walk out that door, you're choosing to fail. Don't expect me to watch it happen or pick up the pieces." Afterward, I walked out. The next 3 months were a blur of activity. Moving to New York, immersing myself in the incubator program, learning about venture capital, user experience design, and the business of healthcare tech. I threw myself into the work, partly out of passion and partly to avoid thinking about the scorched earth I'd left behind in Boston. My brother Michael called occasionally, serving as an uneasy go-between. "She's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown," he reported after one family dinner. "Says the pressure of medical school was too much for you." I laughed, but it hurt. Classic. Better than admitting I chose to leave. "Are you sure about this, Eliza? Your app thing sounds cool, but Mom's not wrong about medicine being a sure thing." "I'm sure," I said, with more confidence than I felt in those early days. As the fellowship period ended, I faced a choice: return to medical school as planned, or commit fully to my startup, now called MedBridge. The platform had evolved from a simple insurance navigator to a comprehensive system that connected underserved patients with affordable care options, telehealth services, medication discount programs, and simplified health record management. We had early users, promising data and interest from a few angel investors. What we didn't have was my mother's blessing, or even acknowledgement that what I was doing had merit. The decision to formally withdraw from Harvard Medical School felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. I submitted the paperwork on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, my mother had removed all my childhood photos from her house and told my aunts I was having a quarter-life crisis. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The annual Chen family reunion was scheduled for that summer at my uncle's lake house in New Hampshire. It had been a tradition since before I was born. 3 days of food, forced family bonding, and thinly veiled competition over whose children were achieving the most. "You should still come," Michael urged. "Stand your ground. And listen to Mom tell everyone how I threw my life away?" "No thanks." "She's telling them anyway," he pointed out. "At least you could defend yourself." But I couldn't face it. Not then. Not when Medbridge was still just potential rather than proof. So I made my excuses and stayed in New York, working 18-hour days and sleeping on a futon in our closet-sized office in the East Village. Later, my cousin Sophia sent me a video snippet from the reunion, my mother holding court on the lake. House deck, wine glass in hand, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. Of course I'm disappointed. Eliza had everything set for her. Harvard. My colleagues are ready to mentor her. And she throws it all away for some internet scheme that will be bankrupt within a year. Some children just need to learn the hard way that mother knows best. The assembled relatives nodded sympathetically. No one contradicted her. I saved that video, not to wallow in the hurt, but as fuel for the long nights and rejection-filled days ahead. Every time an investor passed on funding us, every time a potential partner chose a competitor, every time I questioned whether I'd made the right choice, I would watch it and recommit to proving her wrong. Not out of spite, though there was certainly some of that, but because I genuinely believed in what we were building. Medbridge wasn't just a business to me, it was a mission to fix a broken system that failed too many people. What I didn't know then, as I archived my mother's dismissal of my life choices, was that exactly 4 years later, the universe would deliver the most dramatic vindication possible in a moment that would force my mother and our entire family to reckon with the narrative she had created about my failure. The first year after leaving medical school was the hardest. While the incubator provided initial support, that runway was quickly disappearing. I needed to secure funding to keep Medbridge alive, but investors were skeptical of a medical school dropout with no business experience. "Your concept is interesting," they would say, examining our pitch deck with detached curiosity, "but what's your expertise in healthcare administration?" Or more bluntly, why should we trust someone who couldn't commit to finishing their medical degree? Each rejection reinforced the doubts my mother had planted. Maybe I had made a catastrophic mistake. Maybe I was just another entitled millennial who couldn't handle the discipline required for a real profession. Those thoughts circled my mind late one night as I worked alone in our tiny office. The rest of my small team, 2 developers I'd convinced to work for equity and minimal salary, had gone home hours ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine, who had remained my closest friend despite our diverging paths. "How's the next healthcare revolutionary doing?" I stared at her message, too exhausted to maintain the confident facade I usually presented. "Failing," I typed back honestly. Maybe my mom was right. Jasmine called immediately. "Okay, enough of this. Meet me for breakfast tomorrow, 8 a.m. That diner near your office. No excuses." The next morning, bleary-eyed from another night of minimal sleep, I slid into a booth across from Jasmine, who had somehow managed to look perfectly put together despite being in the middle of her residency. "You look like hell," she greeted me cheerfully. "Thanks for the medical diagnosis, Dr. Morrison." She ignored my sarcasm and pushed a folder across the table. "I brought you something." Inside was a stack of printouts, screenshots of patient message boards, healthcare worker forums, and social media groups. Each page contained highlighted comments from people frustrated with the exact problems Medbridge was trying to solve. "What is this?" I asked. "Evidence," Jasmine said firmly. "Every highlighted section is someone desperately needing what you're building. I spent 2 hours collecting these last night, and I could have found thousands more." I flipped through the pages, reading the highlighted passages. "Spent 4 hours on the phone with insurance today trying to figure out if my son's procedure is covered. Had to choose between refilling my heart medication or paying rent this month. My elderly patients can't navigate the system and fall through the cracks." Your mother sees what you left behind, Jasmine continued. She doesn't see what you're moving toward. But these people? They need you to succeed more than your mother needs you to follow her plan. Something shifted in me that morning. I stopped seeing MedBridge as my rebellious response to my mother's control and started seeing it as a genuine solution for real people. The mission became bigger than my family drama. With renewed focus, I completely reimagined our funding approach. Instead of chasing traditional venture capital, I reached out to physicians frustrated with administrative systems, community health centers struggling with limited resources, and patient advocacy groups. We assembled a coalition of small investments and pilot programs that gave us enough runway to refine our product with real-world feedback. Dr. James Washington, the director of a community health network serving low-income neighborhoods in the Bronx, became an unexpected mentor after implementing MedBridge in 3 of his clinics. "You know what impresses me about your platform?" he said during one of our implementation meetings. "It's clearly designed by someone who understands both the technology and the human elements of healthcare. That's rare." "I'm not a doctor," I admitted, still feeling the sting of my incomplete credentials. "Maybe that's your advantage," he replied thoughtfully. "You're not trapped in the system's way of thinking. You see it from multiple perspectives." Dr. Washington introduced me to his network of healthcare innovators, doctors, administrators, and policy experts who were trying to reform the system from within. Through these connections, MedBridge secured partnerships with 2 major hospital systems willing to pilot our platform with their Medicaid patients. The validation from medical professionals, the very community I had abandoned according to my mother, was particularly sweet. Every time a doctor praised our work, a small voice in my head whispered, "See, Mom, I didn't fail. I just found a different way to help." By the end of our 2nd year, MedBridge had expanded from its initial focus on insurance navigation to include telehealth services for underserved areas, medication price comparison tools, and simplified health record management for patients with chronic conditions. Our user base grew from a few hundred to nearly 20,000, primarily through word-of-mouth referrals from community health workers. What we didn't have was profit, or even significant revenue. We operated on grants, minimal subscription, fees from healthcare providers, and the occasional consulting project. My salary was barely enough to cover rent on the tiny Brooklyn apartment I shared with 2 roommates, both of whom had conventional corporate jobs and couldn't quite understand why I lived like a college student despite being a CEO. My mother's narratives about my failure continued to filter back to me through the family grapevine. At Thanksgiving, which I spent working while my family gathered in Boston, she apparently told everyone that I was living in poverty in New York because of my pride. When my cousin got engaged, my mother lamented that I was so focused on my failing business that I couldn't maintain relationships. When my brother completed his MBA, she used the celebration dinner to contrast his practical approach to business with my idealistic fantasy. Each new report stung, but less than the one before. I was building calluses, emotional armor against her disapproval. The turning point for MedBridge came unexpectedly, through tragedy. A massive hurricane hit the Gulf Coast, devastating communities and disrupting healthcare access for hundreds of thousands of people. Emergency response systems were overwhelmed, and patients with chronic conditions couldn't access their medical records, prescriptions, or providers. We had just completed a feature that allowed patients to store their health information securely and share it instantly with any provider. Within 48 hours of the hurricane, we deployed a modified version specifically for disaster response, working with FEMA and local healthcare agencies to get displaced patients reconnected with their medical histories and medication needs. The system worked. Patients in temporary shelters could pull up their complete medical histories on any device. Volunteer doctors from across the country could immediately access critical information. Pharmacies could verify prescription needs without calling overwhelmed hospitals. Your 3 years of failing just saved lives, Jasmine texted me from the hospital where she was volunteering with relief efforts. Media coverage of the disaster response mentioned MedBridge as an innovative solution. This caught the attention of Marcus Davidson, a former tech executive whose family foundation focused on healthcare accessibility. He requested a meeting, which I expected would lead to a modest grant. Instead, he offered $10 million in funding. "What you've built isn't just an app," he said as I sat across from him, trying not to show my shock at the number. "It's a new infrastructure for patient empowerment, and you've proven it works in the most challenging circumstances possible." With Davidson's investment came connections to his network of philanthropists and impact investors. Within 6 months, we secured an additional $30 million in funding. Suddenly, MedBridge wasn't just surviving, we were scaling. We moved from our cramped office to a real workspace in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Our team expanded from 5 people to 45. I hired experienced executives to handle operations and technology, allowing me to focus on partnerships and product vision. For the first time, I could afford a decent apartment without roommates. I bought new clothes that weren't from clearance. Racks. I even took a weekend off, my first in 3 years, to visit my brother in Chicago. "You look different," Michael said when he picked me up at the airport. "Rich?" I joked. "No." He considered me thoughtfully. "Certain, like you don't need anyone's approval anymore." That night over dinner, Michael hesitantly broached the subject of our mother. "She asks about you, you know. Not directly, but she does." I sipped my wine, considering this. What does she want to know? If you're okay, if you're still doing that app thing, if you're happy. And what do you tell her? The truth, that you seem to be building something important, even if I don't really understand it, that you work too hard, that you never talk about coming back to medicine. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. And how does she respond? She changes the subject, Michael admitted. But Eliza, I think she misses you, in her own complicated way. Part of me wanted to scoff at this, to remind him of every dismissive comment she'd made about my choices. But another part, the part that had been slowly healing as MedBridge succeeded, could acknowledge that my mother's criticism came from her own understanding of the world, limited as it was. "The annual reunion is next month," Michael ventured, "at Uncle David's place again. You should come." The thought of facing my entire extended family, including my mother, made my stomach clench. 3 years had passed since I'd walked out of her office and chosen my own path. In that time, MedBridge had grown from a concept to a company valued at nearly $85 million in our last funding round. By objective measures, I had succeeded. But would that matter to her? Would anything I built ever measure up to the prestige of Dr. Eliza Chen? "I can't," I said finally. "We're launching our partnership with the Veterans Administration that week. It's a big deal for us." Michael looked disappointed, but not surprised. "You can't avoid her forever." "I'm not avoiding her," I protested automatically. "I'm building something important." Later that night in my hotel room, I realized both statements were true. I was building something important, and I was avoiding my mother. The question was whether I could continue doing both indefinitely, and whether I should. What I didn't know then was that circumstances were already in motion that would force a reckoning between my past and my present, between my mother's definition of success and my own. And it would happen in the most public way possible. The Veterans Administration partnership marked a new chapter for MedBridge. What started as a simple tool for underserved communities was now being implemented in one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. Our platform would help millions of veterans navigate their benefits, connect with specialists, and manage their care across multiple facilities. The morning of the launch, I stood in our office surrounded by my team, watching the VA secretary. announced the partnership in a press conference. When he mentioned MedBridge as an innovative solution created by visionary healthcare entrepreneur Eliza Chen, a spontaneous cheer erupted around me. Visionary. Entrepreneur. Not a dropout. Not failure. Amidst the celebration, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Chen, this is Rebecca Torres from CNN Business. We're doing a feature on healthcare innovation and would love to interview you about MedBridge. Please call me at your convenience. I stared at the message in disbelief. CNN wanted to interview me? The same network my mother watched religiously, every morning while drinking her coffee? The channel that was permanently set on her kitchen TV? My COO, Trey, noticed my expression. Everything okay? I wordlessly showed him the text. Holy shit, he grinned. National exposure. This is huge for us. It was huge, potentially game-changing for our growth and mission. But my first thought wasn't about business implications. It was that my mother might finally have to acknowledge what I'd built. The interview was scheduled for the following week, an in-depth profile of MedBridge focusing on our work with disaster response and veterans. Healthcare. The CNN business reporter Rebecca spent 2 days shadowing me, interviewing team members, and even visiting a VA hospital where our system was being implemented. What made you leave Harvard Medical School to pursue this? She asked during our sit-down interview. That couldn't have been an easy decision. The question probed at the exact fault line between my past and present. I could have given a sanitized answer about seeing larger systemic problems, but something compelled me toward honesty. It wasn't easy, I admitted. I come from a family where becoming a doctor is the definition of success. Leaving medicine felt like failing, especially to my mother, who immigrated to this country and built an incredible medical career against all odds. Rebecca leaned forward, sensing a story. How did your family react? I took a deep breath. My mother told me I was throwing my life away. We haven't really spoken since. She tells our family I had some sort of breakdown or crisis because that's easier than accepting I chose a different path. Yet that different path has led to a company now valued at nearly $95 million serving millions of patients. Do you feel vindicated? The question hung in the air. Did I? The external validation was certainly sweet, but the wound of my mother's rejection hadn't fully healed, regardless of our success. I didn't build MedBridge to prove my mother wrong, I said finally. I built it because the healthcare system failed too many people, including my father, who died of a heart attack despite having a cardiologist wife. Success for me isn't about valuation. It's about creating a system where people don't fall through the cracks. Later, reflecting on the interview, I worried I'd shared too much about my family conflict. The last thing I wanted was to publicly air our private drama or make my mother look bad. I called Rebecca and asked if we could keep the personal elements to a minimum. The personal journey is what makes your story compelling, she countered. But I understand your concern. We'll focus primarily on MedBridge's impact, with your background as context. True to her word, when the feature aired 2 weeks later, only a brief segment mentioned my departure from medical school and my family's medical background. The piece highlighted our technological innovations, patient success stories, and the broader impact on healthcare accessibility. It was scheduled to run on a Wednesday morning, significant enough for business coverage, but hardly prime time. What I hadn't anticipated was that CNN would also promote the segment with a Times Square billboard the night before, or that the feature would be reshared across CNN's social media platforms, generating enough interest to warrant a rebroadcast during evening programming. And I certainly hadn't expected that all this would coincide perfectly with the annual Chen family reunion. My sister-in-law Katie was the first to call. Eliza, you're on CNN right now. The whole family is watching it. In the background, I could hear voices exclaiming and my brother saying something I couldn't make out. Wait, what? The whole family? My stomach dropped as I processed the implications. You mean everyone at the reunion? Yes, Katie sounded excited. Uncle David has that massive TV in his lake house living room. Someone saw the preview last night and told everyone to watch. They're all gathered around it right now. My mind raced to earlier that day, when Sophia had texted about my mother telling everyone I'd failed at life. Is my mother there? Is she watching too? Front and center, Katie confirmed, lowering her voice slightly. She hasn't said a word since they mentioned the $95 million valuation. You should see her face. A complex mix of emotions washed over me. Vindication, yes, but also an unexpected sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my mother finally recognizing my accomplishments. Not in front of our entire extended family, forced to confront her own misjudgment so publicly. "I've gotta go," Katie whispered. "Your mother just walked out of the room. Michael's going after her. I'll call you back." For the next several hours, my phone exploded with messages from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. From Aunt Linda, "So proud of you, Eliza. Always knew you were special." From Cousin Peter, "Damn, cuz, you're killing it. Let me know if you need investors for your next venture." From Uncle David, "Impressive work, Eliza. Your father would be proud." That last one hit me hardest. My father, the software engineer whose technological sensibilities I'd inherited, whose death had exposed the gaps in our healthcare system that I was now trying to fix. What would he think of MedBridge, of the rift between my mother and me? Of the person I'd become, my brother finally called late that evening. "So," he began, "you caused quite the scene today." "I didn't mean to," I said truthfully. "I had no idea the feature would air during the reunion. How is she?" Michael sighed. "Complicated. Outwardly, she's telling everyone how proud she is of your entrepreneurial spirit. But privately, I think she's struggling." Struggling with being wrong? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Struggling with realizing she doesn't know you anymore, he corrected gently. And maybe that she never really did. I sat with that, letting the weight of it settle. Has my mother ever truly seen me, or just the projection of what she wanted me to be? "She asked for your number," Michael added. "Said she lost it when she got a new phone." We both knew that was a transparent excuse. She could have gotten my contact information from him or any number of relatives at any time over the past 4 years. This was her way of extending an olive branch without admitting fault. "Did you give it to her?" "Yes. Ball's in her court now." I waited for her call that night, rehearsing what I might say, how I would respond to various scenarios. But my phone remained silent. The next day passed with no contact, then another. Meanwhile, the CNN feature had triggered a cascade of attention. Investor inquiries flooded in. Partnership opportunities multiplied. We were featured in digital health publications, business magazines, and local New York press. My team was ecstatic, working overtime to capitalize on the sudden visibility. I should have been fully present for this moment, the validation of everything we'd built. Instead, I kept checking my phone, waiting for a call from the one person whose validation I'd stopped admitting I still wanted. A week after the CNN feature, I was working late in our office when the security desk called up. "Ms. Chen, there's a Dr. Diana Chen here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." My heart stuttered. "My mother is here? Now?" "Yes, ma'am. Should I send her up?" I looked around at our space. The open floor plan with developers still coding at their desks, the meeting rooms named after healthcare, pioneers. The wall of testimonials from patients whose lives had been improved by our platform. For the first time, I saw it through my mother's eyes. Not as the alternative to medical school, but as something I had created that had genuine value. "Yes," I said, suddenly calm. "Send her up." I met her at the elevator. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than in my memories. Her hair had more gray than I remembered, and the lines around her eyes had deepened. But her posture was still perfect, her clothing impeccable. the Dr. Diana Chen I had grown up both admiring and fearing. "Eliza," she said formally, as if we'd seen each other last week instead of 4 years ago. "Mom," I replied, equally measured. "This is unexpected." She glanced around at the office. "This is bigger than I imagined." Was she referring to the physical space or the company itself? I couldn't tell. "We've grown a lot in the past year," I said. "Would you like a tour?" She nodded, and I led her through the office, introducing her to team members who happened to be working late, showing her our product development area, our customer success center, and the wall of impact statistics we updated monthly. "These numbers," she said, stopping in front of our metrics dashboard, "these are real patients?" "Yes. Each one represents someone who accessed care they might not have otherwise received. Someone who navigated the system successfully because of the tools we built." She studied the dashboard silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to me. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" I led her to my office, a glass-walled space that reflected my leadership philosophy of transparency, but with privacy screens we could activate for sensitive conversations. Once inside, I closed the door and engaged in privacy mode, turning the glass opaque. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, measuring the changes 4 years had wrought. "I saw your interview," she said finally. "I heard. Not exactly how I planned for you to learn about MedBridge. You mentioned your father," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "You said the healthcare system failed him." Of all the things she could have focused on from the interview, this was what she chose to address? "It did," I said carefully. "He was having symptoms for weeks before his heart attack. He tried to navigate referrals to specialists, but the waiting periods were too long. He was trying to schedule an appointment with a cardiologist who wasn't you when he died. Why wasn't I told this?" Her voice had the sharp edge I remembered from childhood confrontations. "Because you were grieving, and it wouldn't have changed anything," I answered honestly. "And because you always saw his death as evidence that he worked too hard on meaningless technology rather than taking care of himself." My mother flinched slightly at hearing her own words quoted back to her. She moved to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline now lit up against the night sky. "Is that why you built this?" she asked without turning around. "Because of him?" The question penetrated deeper than she could know. MedBridge had started as a rebellion against her control, but its soul, its mission, was indeed connected to my father's experience. "Partly," I admitted. "But also because I saw a problem I thought I could solve." "Isn't that why you became a doctor? To solve problems?" She turned back to face me. "I became a doctor because it was a path to security, respect, and the ability to help others. I wanted the same for you." "I know, Mom, but there are other paths to those same destinations." Something shifted in her expression then. Not quite softening, but a subtle relaxation of the judgment that had defined our relationship for so long. $95 million, she said almost to herself. Even I have to admit that's not failure. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a full acknowledgement of her misjudgment. But coming from my mother, it was monumental. I let myself smile slightly. "No, it's not. But the valuation isn't what matters to me. What matters are the lives we're changing." My mother nodded slowly, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn notebook. I recognized it immediately. My father's idea journal, where he'd sketched concepts for software and systems he dreamed of building. "I found this when I was cleaning out some old storage boxes," she said, placing it on my desk. "I thought you might want it." The gesture, simple as it was, conveyed what her words couldn't, a recognition of my connection to my father, an acknowledgement of my path as legitimate even if different from hers. "Thank you," I said, my throat suddenly tight. "I have a flight back to Boston in the morning," she said briskly, reverting to her practical self. "But perhaps we could have breakfast before." I leave? There's a case study I recently published on cardiovascular outcomes in immigrant populations that might be relevant to some of your platform's risk assessment models. It was such a characteristic offer, not emotional reconnection, but professional collaboration. Yet it represented a bridge between our worlds that hadn't existed before. I'd like that, I said. As I walked her back to the elevator, one of our developers called out, "Dr. Chen, is this your mom? The cardiologist you've mentioned?" I tensed slightly, unsure how my mother would react to being introduced as my parent, rather than me as her daughter. But she surprised me, extending her hand with a genuine smile. "Yes, I'm Dr. Diana Chen, Eliza's mother." Eliza's mother. Not, "I'm Dr. Chen, and this is my daughter." The distinction was subtle but profound. As the elevator doors closed between us, I caught a final glimpse of my mother's face, something like pride mixed with curiosity in her expression. Not the uncomplicated reconciliation of a Hallmark movie, but a tentative first step toward a new kind of relationship. The CNN feature had forced a public reckoning with my success, but this quiet moment, my mother standing in the company I'd built, acknowledging its value, was the validation I hadn't known I was still seeking. Breakfast with my mother the next morning was a surreal experience. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of artisanal Brooklyn establishment that would have prompted dismissive comments from her in the past. But today, she simply ordered a cappuccino and avocado toast without commentary. "Your office is impressive," she said after we'd settled in. "Very Silicon Valley." I smiled at her attempt to understand my world through familiar reference points. "We're more mission-driven than your typical tech startup. Most of our team came from healthcare or nonprofit backgrounds. And they respect you? As their leader?" The question revealed one of her core concerns, whether I commanded the same professional respect as I would have as Dr. Chen. "Yes," I said. Simply. "They believe in what we're building and they trust my vision," she nodded, sipping her coffee. "The young man last night, the one who called me the cardiologist you've mentioned, you talk about me?" The vulnerability in the question caught me off guard. "Of course I do. When medical questions come up, I often reference your expertise. The team knows you're a leading cardiologist." Something like relief flickered across her face. Had she imagined I'd erased her from my narrative, the way she'd temporarily removed my photos from her home? "I brought the study I mentioned," she said, pulling a folder from her bag. As she began explaining her research on cardiovascular risk factors specific to Asian American populations, I recognized it for what it was. Not just professional collaboration, but her way of finding common ground. I listened attentively, asking questions about her methodology and findings. For perhaps the first time, we were engaging as fellow professionals rather than mother and daughter, or more accurately, as mother and daughter who respected each other professionally. This could significantly improve our risk assessment algorithms, I said when she finished. "Would you be willing to consult with our clinical team? We'd compensate you, of course." "Compensate me?" She seemed almost offended. "I'm your mother." "You're also a renowned cardiologist whose time and expertise are valuable," I countered. "MedBridge pays market rates for all our medical advisors. I wouldn't ask for special treatment." She studied me for a moment, reassessing. "You really have built something legitimate, haven't you?" "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I have." She folded her hands on the table, her expression turning serious. "At the reunion, before the CNN feature aired, I said things about you that were unfair. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my mother, it was extraordinary. Michael told me. I was wrong," she continued, each word seeming to cost her considerable effort. "About your choices, about what you were capable of building." "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said, careful to keep any trace of triumph from my voice. She looked down at her coffee. When you left medical school, I felt like I had failed, like I hadn't properly conveyed the importance of stability, prestige, the value of the path I'd created for you. It wasn't about rejecting your values, Mom. It was about finding my own way to express them. By fixing the system instead of working within it, she said, showing more understanding than I'd expected. Your father would have approved. He always said systems could be improved with the right code. The mention of my father, without criticism attached, felt like another small breakthrough. I think about him all the time when I'm working, about what he would think of what we're building. My mother's expression softened. He would be proud, Eliza. More than proud. He would be amazed. Tears pricked unexpectedly at my eyes. I wish he could see it. So do I, she said quietly. A silence fell between us. Not the tense, judgmental silences I remembered from our past interactions, but something more contemplative, almost peaceful. Finally, my mother straightened, reverting to her practical self. I should get to the airport. I have patients this afternoon. As we walked to the street to find her a taxi, she turned to me. The family has been calling nonstop since your CNN interview. Everyone's suddenly very interested in what you're doing. I laughed. I bet. Your cousin Peter claims he always believed in you. Said he offered to invest early on. Peter's never invested in anything riskier than an index fund, I said, rolling my eyes. My mother's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. The annual Mid-Autumn Festival dinner is at my house next month. You should come. Bring one of your impressive charts to show everyone. Put Peter in his place. The invitation was casual, but its significance wasn't lost on me. My mother was publicly welcoming me back into the family fold, not as the prodigal daughter, but as a successful entrepreneur in my own right. I might be able to fit it into my schedule, I said, matching her tone. She nodded, then did something she hadn't done in years, reached out and straightened the collar of my shirt, a maternal gesture from my childhood. Good. Your Aunt May keeps bragging about her son, the investment banker. I need ammunition. And there it was, the truth beneath the surface of our reconciliation. My success had become a source of pride for her, something she could present to the family as evidence of her own successful parenting. Some things hadn't changed after all. But as I watched her taxi pull away, I realized I didn't mind. Our relationship would never be uncomplicated, but it was evolving into something more balanced, more honest, a connection between two strong-willed women who had taken different paths to impressive achievements. Back at the office later that morning, Trey noticed my contemplative mood. Everything okay with your mom? Better than I expected, I admitted. We're finding new ground. He nodded, then slid a tablet across my desk. While you were having your family reunion, the SEC filing came through. We're officially approved to move forward. I stared at the document on the screen, confirmation that MedBridge could proceed with our initial public offering. Going public had been our strategy for months, a way to secure the capital needed for our ambitious expansion into global healthcare markets. But seeing the official approval made it suddenly, breathtakingly real. Wow, I whispered. We're really doing this. Cold feet? Trey asked, watching me carefully. I shook my head. No, just taking it in. 4 years ago, I was a medical school dropout with an idea. Now we're preparing for an IPO. Life comes at you fast, he quipped, then grew serious. The roadshow starts next week. Investment banks, potential institutional investors, financial analysts, they're going to scrutinize everything. Our technology, our growth projections, our leadership. He paused. You, specifically. I understood his concern. As the founder and public face of MedBridge, I would be the focus of intense evaluation. My youth, my background, my decision to leave Harvard Medical School, all would be dissected by people making multi-million-dollar investment decisions. I'm ready, I assured him, though my stomach tightened at the prospect. I know you are, Trey said, but there's something else we need to discuss. He closed my office door, his expression unusually grave. The banks have been doing their due diligence, background checks, verification of credentials, the usual pre-IPO stuff. And? I prompted, sensing his discomfort. They found something concerning your departure from medical school. He hesitated. The official record shows you were placed on academic probation for ethical violations before you withdrew. I froze. That's not true. I was in good standing. When I left. That's what I told them. But the documentation they've uncovered suggests otherwise. Something about unauthorized use of patient data in developing a private application. The accusation was so outlandish I almost laughed. That's absurd. I never used actual patient data. The initial prototype was built with synthetic datasets. I believe you, Trey said quickly. But this discrepancy needs to be resolved before the IPO. Any hint of ethical impropriety, especially involving patient privacy, could tank our valuation. Worse, it could undermine trust in our platform. My mind raced. Who would have falsified my academic record? Who had the access and motivation to create such a specific damaging narrative? Then a chilling possibility occurred to me. When did this alleged probation happen? Trey checked his notes. According to the documentation, you were placed on probation in November, about a month before you officially withdrew November. 1 month before I withdrew. The timing lined up perfectly with my meeting with the fellowship program director and my confrontation with my mother. I need to make some calls, I told Trey, struggling to keep my voice steady. Can you send me the documentation they found? As soon as he left, I closed my office door and sank into my chair, trying to process what I'd just learned. If someone had falsified my academic record, it wasn't just a personal attack. It threatened everything we'd built at MedBridge. Our entire business was founded on trust, on the promise that we handled sensitive health information with absolute integrity. Even an unsubstantiated accusation of ethical violations involving patient data could devastate us. After taking a moment to collect myself, I called Dr. Sarah Kaplan, the faculty advisor who had supported my fellowship application. 4 years ago? Eliza Chen, she said warmly when she answered. I was just reading about your company last week. Congratulations on all your success. Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. I wish I were calling under better circumstances. I explained the situation as clinically as I could, keeping my suspicions to myself. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. That's absolutely false. You were never placed on probation while at Harvard. Your record was exemplary, if not always conventional. Is there any way you could check the official records? Apparently, investors have found documentation suggesting otherwise. I'll look into it immediately, she promised. This sounds like a clerical error or some sort of mix-up, but we both knew it was unlikely to be a simple mistake. Falsifying academic records at Harvard Medical School would require significant influence or access. My next call was to Jerome Washington, the director of the Tech Fellowship program that had initially funded MedBridge. I've been expecting your call, he said, skipping any greeting. My office was contacted yesterday by someone conducting a background check for your IPO. My heart sank. What did they ask about? They wanted confirmation that you were honest about your academic standing. When you applied for the fellowship, implied you might have concealed being on probation. His tone was measured, careful. And what did you tell them? The truth. That we thoroughly vetted all candidates, including direct communication with your advisors at Harvard. That your record was clean. He paused. Eliza, someone is trying to sabotage your IPO. I know, I said, the reality of the situation settling like a weight on my chest. Do you have any record of who contacted you? A name? Company? They claimed to be from Goldman Sachs, but when I called my contact there to follow up, they had no record of the inquiry. After ending the call, I sat motionless, piecing together what I knew. Someone had fabricated evidence of ethical violations during my time at Harvard. Someone who understood exactly how damaging such accusations would be to a healthcare technology company preparing for an IPO. Someone with connections or influence at Harvard Medical School. The obvious suspect was my mother. She had the connections, the knowledge of the system, and a history of disapproving of my choices. But we had just begun rebuilding our relationship. Would she sabotage me now, after finally acknowledging my success? I couldn't dismiss the possibility, yet something about it felt wrong. My mother was direct in her disapproval. Underhanded manipulation wasn't her style. Dr. Kaplan called back within the hour. I've checked the official records. There's no mention of probation or ethical violations. Your record shows you took a leave of absence in good standing. That's a relief, I said, though I'd never truly doubted it. However, she continued, her voice tensing, I discovered something concerning. Someone accessed your student records 3 weeks ago using administrative credentials. The system logs show files were viewed, but I can't determine if anything was altered. 3 weeks ago? That timeline didn't match with my reconciliation with my mother, which had only happened days ago. If she was behind this, she'd begun the process while still publicly criticizing me. Do you know whose credentials were used? I asked. The log shows Dean Whitaker's account, but Robert assures me he hasn't accessed student records directly. In years. His assistants handle all that. Dean Robert Whitaker. The name triggered a memory, my mother mentioning him at a dinner party years ago. Robert and I were residents together at Mass General. He still owes me for covering his shifts during his honeymoon. A connection, but was it relevant? I thanked Dr. Kaplan and promised to keep her updated, then immediately called Trey and our legal counsel, Maya. We need to address this head-on, Maya advised after I'd explained the situation. If someone's spreading misinformation about your academic record, we need a clear official statement from Harvard Medical School confirming you left in good standing. I'll reach out to Dean Whitaker directly, I decided. His office can issue a formal letter clearing this up. And if he doesn't cooperate? Trey asked, voicing the concern I'd been avoiding. Then we'll know he might be involved, I said grimly. Contacting the dean of Harvard Medical School to essentially accuse him of potential involvement in falsifying my records was not a step I took lightly. But with our IPO roadshow starting in days, we had no time for a more subtle approach. His assistant answered my call with professional efficiency. Dean Whitaker's office. This is Eliza Chen. I need to speak with the dean regarding an urgent matter concerning my student records. Ms. Chen, the assistant replied, her tone cooling noticeably. The dean is unavailable, but I can take a message. Please tell him this concerns unauthorized access to my records and false information being shared with financial institutions regarding my academic standing. It's imperative I speak with him today. A pause. 1 moment, please. 2. My surprise, the dean himself came on the line moments later. Eliza, it's been some time. Dean Whitaker, thank you for taking my call. I'll be direct. Someone has accessed my student records and is spreading false information about my time at Harvard. Specifically, claims that I was placed on probation for ethical violations. That's a serious accusation, he said, his tone neutral. What evidence do you have of this? Investment banks conducting due diligence for MedBridge's IPO have uncovered documentation suggesting I was disciplined for misusing patient data. Dr. Kaplan has confirmed no such violations exist in my official record, but also that someone accessed my files using your credentials 3 weeks ago. A long silence followed. I see, he finally said. And you're calling because I need a formal letter from your office confirming I left Harvard Medical School in good standing, with no ethical violations or probationary periods on my record. That's an unusual request, Eliza. Student records are confidential. With respect, Dean Whitaker, I'm requesting confirmation about my own record to correct false information that's being maliciously spread. Information that originated from access using your credentials. Another lengthy pause. I'll need to consult with University Counsel before issuing any such letter. I understand. However, time is of the essence. Our IPO roadshow begins next week, and this misinformation threatens not just me personally, but a healthcare platform serving millions of patients. You've certainly done well for yourself, he observed, changing tack suddenly. Your mother must be proud. The mention of my mother sent a chill through me. She is, I said carefully, though she was initially disappointed when I left medicine. Diana was quite upset at the time, he agreed. We spoke at length about it. She was concerned about your judgment, leaving Harvard for what did she call it? An app experiment. The confirmation that my mother and Dean Whitaker had discussed me wasn't surprising, but his casual mention of it felt deliberate, almost like a warning. Dean Whitaker, my mother and I have reconciled our differences regarding my career choices. My concern now is clearing up this false information before it damages MedBridge. Of course, I'll speak with counsel today and be in touch. His tone was polite, but non-committal. Congratulations again on your success, Eliza. It's not the path we expected for you, but impressive nonetheless. After ending the call, I immediately phoned my mother. If Dean Whitaker was involved in this situation, I needed to understand their connection better. Eliza, she answered, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. I just landed in Boston. Mom, I need to ask you something important. How well do you know Dean Whitaker? A slight hesitation. Robert? We were residents together, as I've mentioned. We've served on several medical boards together over the years. Why? Did you discuss my leaving medical school with him? Of course, she said matter-of-factly. I was upset and sought his advice. He was sympathetic, said many promising students get distracted by outside opportunities. He suggested giving you time to get it out of your system. Did you stay in touch with him after I left? Discuss my career? Occasionally, she admitted. He would ask about you at functions and I would update him. Eliza, what is this about? I took a deep breath and explained the situation, the false claims about ethical violations, the accessed records, the threat to our IPO. That's absurd, my mother said when I finished. You would never misuse patient data. You're too ethical, if anything. Her immediate defense surprised me. The question is, who would create this false narrative and why? It happened 3 weeks ago, using the dean's credentials. My mother was silent for a long moment. 3 weeks ago was when the VA partnership was announced. Yes, I confirmed, not seeing the relevance. Robert's son works for Axiom Health Systems, she said slowly. They were competing for that VA contract. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Axiom Health, one of the largest healthcare technology companies in the country, and one of MedBridge's main competitors. They had been the front-runner for the VA partnership until our patient-centered approach won over the evaluation committee. Are you saying Dean Whitaker might have helped his son's company by sabotaging me? The idea seemed far-fetched, yet it aligned with the evidence. I'm not accusing anyone, my mother said carefully. But Robert has always been ambitious for his family. He was very involved in getting his son positioned at Axiom. Why would he wait until now? We've been competing with Axiom for years. Because now you're a real threat, my mother said, her voice taking on the clinical precision I remembered from childhood discussions of her medical cases. With the VA contract and the publicity from CNN, MedBridge isn't just a successful startup anymore. You're poised to become a major player, potentially worth billions after an IPO. That threatens established companies like Axiom. The analysis was sound, and coming from my mother, who had initially dismissed MedBridge as a temporary diversion, it represented a profound shift in how she viewed my work. I need to prove it was him, I said, thinking aloud. No, my mother countered firmly. What you need is to neutralize the threat to your company. Proving Robert's involvement is secondary and might not even be possible. What do you suggest? Let me make some calls, she said. Robert isn't the only one with connections at Harvard Medical School. As I hung up, I sat back in my chair, processing this unexpected alliance with my mother. After years of her undermining my choices, she was now leveraging her professional network to protect the very company she had once dismissed. Family relationships were complicated enough under normal circumstances. Add in professional rivalries, corporate sabotage, and an impending IPO, and they became nearly impossible to navigate. Yet somehow, facing this new threat had accelerated the tentative reconciliation between my mother and me. Whether this alliance would last beyond the current crisis remained to be seen, but for now, I was grateful to have Dr. Diana Chen fighting in my corner rather than judging from the sidelines. By the next morning, the situation had escalated. 3 major investment banks had contacted our CFO requesting clarification about my academic record. Our lead underwriter had scheduled an emergency call to discuss potential disclosure issues. The whisper campaign was spreading exactly as someone had intended. I gathered our executive team for an emergency meeting, laying out what we knew and the steps we were taking to counter the false narrative. Dean Whitaker's office has promised a response by end of day, I told them. But given his potential connection to Axiom, I'm not optimistic. We should consider delaying the IPO, our CFO suggested. Give ourselves time to clear this up properly. Delaying sends a signal we have something to hide, Maya, our legal counsel, countered. The markets will punish us for it later. If we proceed with this hanging over us, we risk a significant valuation hit, Trey argued. We're talking tens of millions in lost capital. As the debate continued, my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Dr. Diana Chen is in the CIE lobby with 2 other people. She says it's regarding your Harvard records. I excused myself, curious about who my mother had brought and what strategy she had developed. When I reached the lobby, I found her standing with an older woman I didn't recognize, and, to my complete shock, Dr. Harrison, my former professor whose lecture I had skipped to work on the earliest version of MedBridge. Eliza, my mother greeted, me with a brisk nod. This is Dr. Margaret Lin, Harvard Medical School's current Dean of Student Affairs. And you remember Dr. Harrison. Dr. Lin extended her hand. Ms. Chen, I understand there's some confusion regarding your academic record that needs immediate clarification. I led them to our conference room, away from the curious eyes of my team. Once settled, Dr. Lin opened her briefcase and removed an official-looking folder. I've reviewed your complete academic file personally, she began. I can confirm that you were never placed on academic probation, nor were there any ethical violations recorded during your time at Harvard Medical School. You left in good standing on an approved leave of absence. Relief flooded through me. Thank you for confirming that. May I ask how you became involved in this matter? Dr. Lin glanced at my mother. Dr. Chen contacted me last night with concerns about potential tampering with student records. Given the serious nature of these allegations, I initiated an immediate investigation. And what did you find? I asked, hardly daring to hope for definitive evidence. Our IT security team identified unauthorized access to your records from Dean Whitaker's account 3 weeks ago, as you were already aware. What you may not know is that the access occurred at 9:30 p.m. when the dean was demonstrably at a fundraising dinner. Someone else used his credentials, I concluded. Precisely. Further investigation revealed that the access came from a computer registered to James Whitaker, the dean's son. Dr. Harrison, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. James and I serve on a healthcare innovation committee together. He's mentioned his work at Axiom frequently, including their disappointment over losing the VA contract to, and I quote, a dropout's glorified app. The confirmation of my suspicions should have been satisfying, but mostly I felt tired. Corporate sabotage seemed so petty, so far removed from the mission of improving healthcare that had driven me to build MedBridge in the first place. "We've prepared an official letter confirming your academic standing," Dr. Lin continued, sliding a document across the table. "Additionally, the university will be issuing a statement later today addressing the unauthorized access to your records and reaffirming that any documents suggesting ethical violations are fraudulent." I scanned the letter, comprehensive, unequivocal, and bearing the official Harvard Medical School seal. It was exactly what we needed to counter the rumors threatening our IPO. "This is tremendously helpful," I said, looking up at Dr. Lin and Dr. Harrison. "But I have to ask, why are you getting involved personally? This could have been handled through official channels." Dr. Harrison smiled slightly. "Because your work matters, Eliza. What you've built with MedBridge is addressing problems in healthcare delivery that many of us in academic medicine have been talking about for decades. When your mother called me about this situation, I felt obligated to help protect that mission." I turned to my mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. "And you? I appreciate your help, but this goes far beyond our breakfast conversation." Something flashed in her eyes, determination perhaps, or anger. "When you left medical school, I thought you were rejecting everything I valued. Discipline, scientific rigor, commitment to patient care. I was wrong. You've applied all of those values just in a different arena." She glanced at Dr. Lin. "And I won't allow Robert Whitaker's petty corporate maneuvering to damage what you've built." The fierceness in her voice, the same tone she used when advocating for difficult patients, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. For perhaps the first time, my mother was truly seeing my work through the lens of our shared values rather than her predetermined expectations. "There's one more thing," Dr. Lin said, breaking the moment. "The university's legal department is still determining how to address Dean Whitaker's involvement. While the evidence suggests his son used his credentials without permission, Dean's failure to report the breach raises serious questions. I'm not interested in punishing Dean Whitaker," I said truthfully. "I just need to protect MedBridge and our mission." "That's commendable," Dr. Lin replied. "However, the integrity of our institution is also at stake. Academic records are sacrosanct. Tampering with them to damage a graduate's professional reputation cannot go unaddressed." After Dr. Lin and Dr. Harrison left with promises to expedite the university's official statement, I was left alone with my mother. The conference room felt suddenly too large, too quiet. "How did you manage all of this so quickly?" I finally asked. "Margaret and I were residents together," she said with a slight shrug. "And I've served on several alumni committees with Christopher Harrison over the years. When something needs to be done urgently, it helps to bypass bureaucracy." I smiled, despite myself. "You've spent years building professional relationships, knowing exactly who to call in a crisis. That's what a career is, Eliza. Not just the work itself, but the connections and influence you develop along the way." She studied me with newfound respect. "You've done the same thing, in your own way. Your team here, the VA partnership, you've built something substantial." Coming from my mother, this assessment felt monumental. Not grudging acknowledgement or backhanded praise, but genuine recognition of the parallels between our different paths. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Not just for saying that, but for all of this." I gestured at the letter from Harvard, the tangible evidence of her intervention. "You're my daughter," she replied, as if that explained everything. And perhaps, in her mind, it did. After briefing my executive team on the developments and distributing copies of Harvard's official letter to our investors and underwriters, I found myself with an unexpected lull in the crisis. Dr. Lin's promised university statement was released by mid-afternoon, effectively neutralizing the threat to our IPO. The lead underwriter called to confirm we were back on schedule. Crisis averted, Trey declared, dropping into the chair across from my desk. I've got to say, your mother is a force of nature. Remind me never to get on her bad side. I laughed. Trust me, you don't want to experience that. Seriously, though, he continued, his expression sobering. What Axiom tried to pull, it shows they see us as a legitimate threat. That's actually a good sign for our market position. I suppose, I agreed, though the attempted sabotage still left a sour taste. I just keep thinking about how far removed this corporate gamesmanship is from why we started MedBridge in the first place. Trey nodded thoughtfully. The bigger we get, the more we'll face this kind of thing. Competitors trying to undermine us, regulatory hurdles, market pressures to maximize profit over mission. That's what worries me about the IPO, I admitted. Will public shareholders push us away from our core mission? Will quarterly earnings expectations change how we make decisions? Only if we let them, Trey said firmly. The governance structure we've set up preserves your control specifically to protect the mission. And going public gives us the capital to expand that mission globally. He was right, of course. We'd spent months structuring our IPO to ensure I maintained decision-making authority while accessing the capital markets. The dual-class share structure meant I would control voting rights, even with a minority economic interest, a setup increasingly common among mission-driven tech companies. Still, seeing how quickly rumors and corporate maneuvering had nearly derailed years of work was sobering. The business world is played by different rules than the medical community I'd been raised to revere. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dinner tonight? I've extended my stay through tomorrow. The invitation surprised me. I'd assumed she would return to Boston now that the crisis was resolved. I'd like that, I replied. My place? I can cook. You cook now? Came her immediate response. I smiled at her skepticism. I had to learn when I couldn't afford takeout every night. Nothing fancy but edible. I'll bring wine, she texted back. That evening, as I prepared a simple pasta dish in my apartment kitchen, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past few weeks. From the CNN feature that forced my mother to acknowledge my success to her unexpected alliance in defending MedBridge, our relationship had evolved more in days than in the previous 4 years. When she arrived, bottle of wine in hand, I was struck again by how ordinary she appeared outside her usual context of medical authority. Just a woman in her 60s, my mother, looking slightly uncertain in my space. Nice apartment, she commented, glancing around at the open floor plan and wall of windows overlooking the Brooklyn skyline. Much better than where Michael said you were living before. The investors would probably prefer I lived somewhere more modest and put everything back into the company, I joked. But quality of life matters too. Balance, my mother agreed, surprising me. Something I wasn't always good at modeling for you. I busied myself opening the wine to hide my reaction to this unexpected self-awareness. Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself comfortable. As we ate, conversation flowed more easily than I could remember in years. We talked about my brother's new baby, about advances in cardiac imaging, about my plans to expand MedBridge internationally after the IPO. For brief stretches, we were just family catching up, the complicated history between us temporarily suspended. After dinner. As we moved to the living room with fresh glasses of wine, my mother's expression grew more serious. I've been thinking about what you said on CNN, about your father's death and the healthcare system failing him. I tensed slightly. This was delicate territory. I wasn't trying to blame you if that's what you're worried about. No, I know that. She twisted her wedding ring, a habit I recognized from childhood discussions of difficult topics. But you were right. The system did fail him. And in some ways, so did I. Mom, you don't have to. Please let me say this. She took a deep breath. After your father died, I channeled all my grief into reinforcing the path I'd chosen. Medicine, stability, prestige. I convinced myself those things would protect you from the uncertainty that took him from us. I remained silent, sensing she needed to continue. When you chose to leave that path, it felt like you were rejecting not just my guidance, but everything I'd built to keep you safe. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I couldn't see that you were actually honoring your father in your own way, using his skills, his approach to problem-solving, to fix the very system that failed him. The recognition was so profound, so precisely what I had needed to hear for years, that tears pricked at my eyes. "That's exactly what drives me," I whispered. "Every time we help a patient navigate a complex system or connect with care they otherwise couldn't access, I think of Dad." My mother nodded, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "He would be so proud of what you've built, Eliza. Not just the success or the valuation, but the purpose behind it. I should have seen that sooner." "You see it now," I said simply. "That matters." We sat in the gentle silence that followed, the city lights twinkling beyond my windows. Not all wounds were healed between us. Some scars would always remain from the years of judgment and separation. But something fundamental had shifted, a mutual recognition that transcended our different paths. "So," my mother said finally, her tone lightening, "tell me more about this IPO. Will I need to buy stock in my daughter's company to secure my retirement?" I laughed, grateful for the release of tension. "I think we can arrange some friends and family shares, though you should know I'm a high-risk, high-reward investment." "Aren't all daughters," she replied with unexpected warmth. "And yet somehow it's still worth it." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation for our IPO. The roadshow, a marathon of presentations to potential investors across the country, consumed every waking hour. My team and I refined our pitch until we could deliver it in our sleep, anticipating and addressing every possible question about our business model, growth projections, and competitive advantages. "Remember," Trey advised as we boarded the private jet for our first stop in Chicago, "these investors aren't buying just the numbers. They're buying you, your vision, your leadership, your story." I nodded, though the pressure of carrying that responsibility felt momentarily overwhelming. My story had become more complicated in recent weeks, no longer simply the medical school dropout who built a healthcare platform, but the daughter of a prominent physician navigating a complex reconciliation while fending off corporate sabotage. "Just be authentic," Maya suggested, noticing my tension. "Your passion for the mission is what convinces people. That can't be faked." Our first presentation was to a room of 50 investment managers at a major fund in Chicago. As I walked them through MedBridge's journey, from initial concept to the VA partnership and our plans for global expansion, I found myself incorporating elements of my personal story more naturally than I had in previous investor pitches. "Healthcare is personal. For me," I told them, departing slightly from our rehearsed script. "My father died because he couldn't navigate the system quickly enough. My mother built her career working within that system, treating one patient at a time. I chose a third path, using technology to transform the system itself, making it work, better for both patients and providers." The response was immediate and positive. During the Q&A session, instead of just financial questions, investors wanted to know more about our mission, our impact metrics, our vision for healthcare accessibility. "You've found your narrative," Trey observed as we left the meeting with strong interest from the fund. "The tension between your medical background and tech approach, it's compelling. It differentiates us from typical tech companies or traditional healthcare players." He was right. Over the next several weeks, as we crisscrossed the country pitching to investment banks, pension funds, and venture capitalists, I refined this narrative. MedBridge wasn't just my rebellion against predetermined expectations. It was the synthesis of my parents' influences, combining my mother's dedication to healthcare with my father's technological innovation. Somewhat to my surprise, my mother became an active supporter during this period. She adjusted her schedule to join me for the Boston leg of the roadshow, sitting unobtrusively in the back of the room as I presented to investors in her city. "You handled that question about interoperability protocols brilliantly," she commented, afterward, referencing a technically complex moment from the presentation. "I didn't understand half the terms you used, but you clearly know what you're talking about." Coming from my mother, who had once dismissed my app experiment, this recognition of my expertise was particularly meaningful. "How does it feel?" I asked as we walked through the Boston Common, taking a rare break between meetings. "Seeing me in this context? Doing something so different from what you imagined for me?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "Initially, strange. I kept thinking about all the years of medical training you set aside." She glanced at me. "But watching you speak about healthcare systems with such authority, seeing how those investors respond to your vision, I understand now that you're still practicing a kind of medicine, just at a different scale. System-level treatment instead of individual patients," I suggested. "Exactly," she nodded. "You're treating the healthcare ecosystem itself." The metaphor pleased me, a bridge between our worlds that acknowledged the validity of both. As the roadshow continued, investor interest exceeded our most optimistic projections. Our initial target had been to raise $300 million at a $1.2 billion valuation. By the third week, our underwriters were advising that we could potentially raise $400 million at a $1.5 billion valuation. "The narrative is resonating," our lead banker explained during a strategy call. "Healthcare technology with an authentic mission, led by a founder with both medical background and proven execution capabilities. It's hitting the right notes in the current market." The night before our final presentation in New York, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Davidson, the philanthropist whose initial $10 million investment had helped MedBridge scale. "I hear the roadshow's going exceptionally well," he said, after preliminary greetings. "Congratulations." "Thank you. We're cautiously optimistic about the pricing." In the world of IPOs, even with strong interest, nothing was certain until the final share price was set. "I'm not calling about the IPO directly," he continued. "Though that's related. I wanted to discuss the Davidson Foundation's plans to expand our healthcare accessibility initiatives globally." This was news to me. The foundation had been a supportive partner in our domestic expansion, but hadn't previously indicated international ambitions. "We're looking to commit $200 million over 5 years to bring healthcare technology solutions to underserved regions, starting with Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. We'd like MedBridge to be the core platform for this initiative." The scale of the opportunity took my breath away. We had always planned to expand internationally, but resource constraints had pushed those plans several years into the future. With the Davidson Foundation's backing, we could accelerate that timeline dramatically. "That's an incredible opportunity," I said, mind racing with possibilities. "Aligning with our mission perfectly." "There's a condition," Davidson added. "We need someone who truly understands both the technology and healthcare delivery challenges to lead the initiative. Someone with your unique perspective, Eliza?" I frowned, confused. "I'm not sure I follow. I'll be fully involved as MedBridge's CEO, of course. We're asking for more than that. We want you to chair a new Global Healthcare Accessibility Council that would oversee not just the technology implementation, but also policy advocacy, medical training programs, and infrastructure development." "That sounds like a full-time position," I said carefully. "I already have one of those," Davidson chuckled. "It would require significant commitment, yes. But we believe you're uniquely qualified to bridge the technological and medical aspects of this work. No one else combines your background with your proven ability to execute." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of my mother lamenting my departure from medicine, I was now being recruited for a global healthcare leadership role, precisely because of my unusual combination of medical knowledge and technological expertise. Can I consider the proposal and discuss it with my team after the IPO? I asked. We're quite focused on tomorrow's final presentation. Of course, Davidson agreed easily. But don't wait too long. The Foundation's board meets next month to finalize the initiative parameters. After we hung up, I sat on my hotel bed, turning over this unexpected development. The Davidson Foundation's proposal represented exactly the kind of global impact I had always dreamed of for MedBridge. Yet the timing and structure presented complicated questions about my role as a public company CEO. I picked up my phone and did something that would have been unthinkable months earlier. I called my mother for advice. An intriguing dilemma, she said, after I explained the situation. What's holding you back from saying yes immediately? My responsibility to MedBridge's shareholders, for one thing, I replied. We're about to go public. How would it look if the founder immediately diverted attention to another initiative? Valid concern, she acknowledged. What else? I hesitated, then admitted the deeper truth. I'm not sure I'm qualified for what Davidson is describing. The technological side, yes. But global health policy, medical training programs, that sounds more like a doctor's expertise? She finished. For me? Yes. My mother was quiet for a moment, then spoke with unexpected gentleness. Eliza, do you know why I pushed you so hard toward medicine? Because it was the path you knew, I answered automatically. Security, prestige, a clear trajectory. Partly, she conceded, but also because I saw in you something essential for a truly exceptional physician, not just intelligence, but empathy combined with systems thinking. You could see both the individual patient and the larger context of their care. That's rare. Her assessment surprised me, not just the compliment itself, but the insight into how she had seen me all those years. The irony, she continued, is that those same qualities made you excellent at what you're doing now. And they're exactly what Davidson is recognizing for this global initiative. I absorbed this perspective, seeing my journey through a different lens. So you think I should consider it? I think you should stop questioning your qualifications and start thinking about impact, my mother replied pragmatically. Where can you do the most good with your particular combination of skills? That's actually helpful advice, I admitted. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. I occasionally have those to offer. Get through your IPO first. Then we can discuss this further. The next morning, our final roadshow presentation in New York went flawlessly. The room was packed with investment bankers, fund managers, and analysts, the largest audience of our entire tour. Many had clearly done their homework, asking sophisticated questions about our technology architecture and clinical impact metrics. Toward the end of the Q&A session, a silver-haired man in the back raised his hand. Ms. Chen, your journey from Harvard Medical School to healthcare technology entrepreneur is compelling, but looking forward, how do you balance shareholder expectations for growth with your clearly passionate commitment to accessibility for underserved populations? I immediately recognized James Whitaker from news photos, Dean Whitaker's son, the Axiom executive who had attempted to sabotage our IPO by falsifying my academic record. His presence was bold, almost confrontational, given what had transpired. The room tensed slightly, those aware of the backstory waiting to see how I would handle this loaded question from a competitor. I met his gaze steadily. That's an excellent question, and one we've thoughtfully structured our company to address. First, our dual-class share structure ensures mission-aligned governance even as a public company. Second, we've found that patient accessibility and shareholder value aren't opposing forces, they're complementary. Our work with underserved populations has driven our most innovative solutions, which then scale across all markets. I paused, then added with deliberate emphasis. Healthcare is ultimately about trust. patients trusting providers, providers trusting systems, and investors trusting companies to maintain ethical standards while driving growth. We've built MedBridge on that foundation of trust, and it will continue to guide our decisions. The subtle reference to ethical standards wasn't lost on Whitaker, whose expression tightened almost imperceptibly. But he simply nodded and sat down. After the presentation concluded, Trey intercepted me before I could leave the stage. "Whitaker has some nerve showing up here," he muttered. "Actually, I'm glad he did," I replied, surprising myself with the realization. His presence reminds me why we're doing this, not just to build a valuable company, but to change how healthcare technology operates, including the ethical standards of the industry. As we gathered our materials, our lead banker approached with an excited expression. "Preliminary indications are extremely positive. We're looking at potentially pricing at the high end of our revised range, or even above it." I nodded, maintaining a composed exterior despite the thrill of this news. A higher share price meant more capital for MedBridge's mission, more resources to expand our impact. "The after-party starts in an hour at the plaza," he continued. "Key investors will be there. Your presence would be appreciated." The customary celebration after the final roadshow presentation was an important networking opportunity, a chance to strengthen relationships with the financial community that would soon own shares in MedBridge. "I'll be there," I assured him. "But first, I need to make a quick call." Finding a quiet corner of the now emptying presentation hall, I dialed Marcus Davidson. "I've been thinking about your proposal," I said when he answered. "That was quick," he replied, sounding pleased. "Have you made a decision?" "Not exactly, but I have a counter-proposal." The idea had crystallized during my conversation with my mother, then solidified as I faced Whitaker's challenge. Rather than me personally chairing the global initiative, what if MedBridge and the Davidson Foundation created a joint entity? We would contribute our technology platform and implementation expertise. You would provide the funding and policy connections. "Interesting," Davidson said thoughtfully. "But we still need leadership with your unique perspective." "I agree," I said. "Which is why I'd like to propose someone with even more extensive medical expertise, who also understands MedBridge's mission intimately, my mother, Dr. Diana Chen." The suggestion surprised me as much as Davidson, but as soon as I voiced it, I knew it was right. My mother's decades of medical experience, combined with her newly developed appreciation for MedBridge's technological approach, made her ideally suited for the role. And professionally, after years of successful practice, she might be ready for a new challenge that expanded her impact globally. "Your mother?" Davidson sounded intrigued. "The cardiologist you mentioned in your CNN interview?" "Yes. She has 30 years of clinical experience, has served on numerous medical boards, and has strong connections throughout the healthcare community. Plus, she's recently become quite engaged with MedBridge's mission." "It's an unexpected suggestion," Davidson admitted. "But potentially brilliant. Would she be interested?" "I need to discuss it with her," I said. "But I believe she might find it a compelling opportunity to expand her impact." After ending the call with Davidson, I texted my mother, "Are you free tomorrow morning for breakfast? I have a proposition that might interest you." Her reply came quickly. "Intriguing. Yes. Your place or mine?" I smiled at how easily we'd fallen into regular communication after years of distance. "Neither. Meet me at the Four Seasons at 9. Wear something professional." Later that evening, as I circulated through the crowded reception at the plaza, accepting congratulations and discussing MedBridge's future with soon-to-be shareholders, I felt a strange sense of coming full circle. 4 years earlier, I had left the structured path of medicine for the uncertain future of entrepreneurship, facing my mother's disapproval and my own doubts. Now, I stood on the verge of taking MedBridge public at a valuation approaching $1.5 billion, while potentially creating a path for my mother to expand her impact beyond individual patients. The traditional roles we had occupied, she the successful professional, I the disappointing daughter, had evolved into something more balanced, more collaborative. To Medbridge, our lead banker called out, raising a champagne flute for a toast. And to Eliza Chen, whose vision and determination have brought us to this milestone. As glasses clinked around the room, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ornate mirrors adorning the ballroom walls. I looked confident, professional, and unmistakably my mother's daughter. The realization no longer felt like a burden, but an inheritance I could finally appreciate. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Just saw the news alert about tomorrow's pricing. Congratulations, Eliza. Whatever this breakfast proposition is, it better include champagne. I smiled, typing back. Better than champagne. A chance to change global healthcare. Details tomorrow. Sleep well, Mom. The formal distance that had characterized our communications for years had given way to something warmer, more natural. Not perfect, still occasionally awkward, but evolving, like Medbridge itself, into something with greater impact than either of us had initially imagined. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket and returned to conversations with investors, I carried a quiet certainty. Whatever came next, the IPO, the Davidson Foundation initiative, my ongoing reconciliation with my mother, I had found my path. Not the one prescribed for me since childhood, not a reactive rebellion against expectations, but a genuine expression of my values and capabilities. And for the first time, my mother was seeing it too. The morning of Medbridge's initial public offering dawned clear and crisp, a perfect New York autumn day. I woke before my alarm, the mixture of excitement and anxiety making sleep impossible. Today, the company I had built from a simple app in my medical school apartment would become publicly traded, owned in part by thousands of investors who believed in our vision. I'd chosen a navy blue suit for the occasion, professional without being flashy, projecting the confidence investors expected while still feeling true to myself. As I dressed, I thought about the journey that had led to this moment. The late nights coding while my medical school classmates slept, the rejection from countless investors who couldn't see the potential, the gradual building of a team who shared my vision for transforming healthcare accessibility. But mostly, I thought about how my relationship with my mother had transformed alongside Medbridge's growth, from her dismissal of my internet scheme to our breakfast yesterday where she had cautiously but genuinely embraced the opportunity to chair the Davidson Foundation's Global Healthcare Initiative. It would mean stepping back from my clinical practice, she had said, turning the proposal over carefully. At my age, that's not a small consideration. You wouldn't have to stop practicing entirely, I had pointed out. Many foundation leaders maintain limited clinical work to stay connected to frontline care. She nodded thoughtfully. And the initiative would allow me to address systemic issues I've observed throughout my career, but never had the platform to influence. Exactly. You'd be bringing decades of clinical expertise to global healthcare policy, something most technologists or policy experts can't offer. While leveraging the technological solutions you've developed, she had added, completing the picture. Your father would appreciate the symmetry. The mention of my father had hung between us, not painfully as it once might have, but as a shared reference point, a recognition of his influence on both our paths. I'll consider it seriously, she had promised. But today belongs to Medbridge. Let me know what time to arrive at the exchange. Now, as my car approached the New York Stock Exchange, I spotted my executive team waiting at the entrance. Trey, Maya, our CFO Jennifer, and our Chief Medical Officer Dr. Patel stood together, all dressed formally for the occasion. And with them, her posture perfect, her expression a mixture of pride and contained excitement, was my mother. You're early, I said as I joined them, genuinely surprised. My mother had planned to meet us inside. I wanted to see the whole process, she replied simply. This is a significant moment in your career. I didn't want to miss any part of it. The acknowledgement that this was indeed a career milestone worthy of witnessing completely, not just a consolation prize for leaving medicine, meant more than she could know. Inside, we were escorted to the trading floor where MedBridge would officially list under the ticker symbol MDBR. The energy was palpable. Traders calling out positions, screens flashing with market data, the controlled chaos of global finance in motion. The markets responding positively to early indicators. Our lead banker informed us, checking his tablet. We're seeing strong pre-market interest. The MedBridge team was positioned on the ceremonial balcony overlooking the trading floor. As founder and CEO, I would ring the opening bell, signaling the start of trading and officially launching MedBridge as a public company. 2 minutes to the opening bell, an exchange official announced. I turned to my team, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude for each person who had helped build MedBridge from concept to public company. I want to thank all of you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Whatever happens when that bell rings, we've already succeeded at the most important metrics, building technology that helps people access better healthcare and creating a company culture we can be proud of. Dr. Patel nodded, smiling. From a simple insurance navigation app to a comprehensive platform serving millions, it's been quite a journey, Eliza. And it's just beginning, Trey added. Going public isn't the destination, it's fuel for the mission. As the official handed me the ceremonial hammer to ring the bell, I caught my mother's eye. She gave me a small, encouraging nod, the same gesture I remembered from childhood piano recitals and science competitions. But now, instead of expectation or evaluation, her expression conveyed simple pride. The bell rang out across the trading floor, and cheers erupted from the MedBridge team. On the massive screens above the trading floor, our company logo appeared alongside the initial share price, 32s, well above our target range of $26 to $30. Strong open, the banker commented, watching the first trades execute. Markets responding. Well, throughout the morning, we divided our time between media interviews and watching the stock performance from a private viewing room. MDBR shares climbed steadily, reaching $36 by midday, a 12.5% increase from the opening price. At current market cap, we're approaching a $1.7 billion valuation, Jennifer calculated, unable to contain her excitement. The additional capital gives us a runway to accelerate international expansion by at least 18 months. My mother, who had been quietly observing the financial discussions, finally spoke up. What does this mean for the patients you serve? How will this new capital translate to improved healthcare access? It was such a characteristic question from her, cutting through financial metrics to the actual impact on patient care, that I smiled involuntarily. That's the most important question, I agreed. With this funding, we can expand our platform to rural hospitals months earlier than planned, accelerate our language accessibility features for immigrant communities, and build out our chronic condition management tools for patients with limited resources. My mother nodded, satisfied. Then it's truly successful, regardless of the share price. By the closing bell, MDBR had settled at $37.50, representing a first-day increase of 17% and a total company valuation of $1.73 billion. Financial analysts were calling it one of the strongest healthcare technology IPOs of the year. As the trading day ended, my team and I gathered for a celebratory toast in a private room at the exchange. To MedBridge, Trey said, raising his champagne glass. And to our fearless leader who saw the future of healthcare when the rest of us were still struggling with insurance paperwork. Everyone laughed, clinking glasses. As the celebration continued, my mother discreetly pulled me aside. I've made my decision about the Davidson Foundation proposal, she said without preamble, typical of her direct approach. Already? I was surprised by her speed. You said you needed time to consider. I've had 4 years to observe what you've built Even if I wasn't acknowledging its value properly, she replied. And I've had decades to consider what's missing in global healthcare delivery. The connection between those two realities is clear to me now. So your answer is? Yes, she said firmly. On one condition. I want you directly involved as well. Not running it day to day, but as a strategic advisor. This should be a true collaboration between medical expertise and technological innovation. The proposal resonated with me immediately. A partnership. Exactly. Your vision, my experience. Together. The symmetry was perfect, neither of us abandoning our primary professional identities, but creating something new at the intersection of our different worlds. I think Davidson will be thrilled with this arrangement, I said. And personally, I'd welcome the chance to work with you. Something soft flickered across my mother's expression. As would I. The moment was interrupted as Trey approached with a tablet. Sorry to intrude, but you should see this. CNBC is running a special feature on MedBridge. On the screen, the business news anchor was speaking alongside footage from our bell-ringing ceremony. In what analysts are calling a personal and professional vindication, former medical school dropout Eliza Chen took her healthcare platform MedBridge public today at a valuation approaching $1.7 billion. Chen, who left Harvard Medical School 4 years ago against her family's wishes, has proved that sometimes the biggest impact in healthcare comes from outside traditional medical practice. The camera cut to a brief clip from my CNN interview. Then, back to the anchor. Notably present at today's IPO ceremony was Dr. Diana Chen, Eliza's mother and a prominent Boston cardiologist who had previously been critical of her daughter's career change. Sources close to the family described today as a powerful reconciliation story alongside the business success. I glanced at my mother, concerned about her reaction to this public framing of our personal relationship. But rather than discomfort, I saw a thoughtful consideration in her expression. They're not entirely wrong, she said quietly. Today is about reconciliation as much as business success. Perhaps not in the simplistic way they're presenting it, but in something deeper. The reconciliation of different approaches to the same underlying values, I suggested. She nodded. Precisely. Different expressions of the same commitment to improving healthcare. As the celebration continued around us, my phone buzzed with a text from my brother. Watching you on CNBC. Mom looks like she might actually burst with pride. Never thought I'd see the day. Congrats, sis. Dad would be over the moon. Reading. The message, I felt a sudden wave of emotion. Not just for the business milestone or the stock performance, but for the healing that had transpired alongside MedBridge's growth. The company had become not just my professional success, but a bridge between generations, between traditional medicine and technological innovation, between my mother's world and mine. Later that evening, after the formal celebrations had concluded, I found myself walking with my mother through Madison Square Park. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet, the city lights glittering against the early evening sky. I've been thinking about the family reunion, my mother said unexpectedly. When I told everyone you had failed at life, I tensed slightly at the memory. That feels like a lifetime ago now. It was cruel, she acknowledged, stopping to face me directly. And fundamentally wrong. Not just factually incorrect about your success, but wrong in the underlying judgment that leaving medicine constituted failure. The frank admission surprised me. Thank you for saying that. I've spent my career believing that being a physician was the highest calling, she continued. That direct patient care was the most meaningful contribution one could make. It's how I defined my worth, my identity. I know, I said gently. It's why my choice felt like such a rejection to you. She nodded. But watching what you've built with MedBridge, seeing how many patients you've helped access care they otherwise couldn't, I've had to reconsider that framework entirely. It's not either or, I pointed out. The world needs both dedicated physicians like you and systemic innovations like MedBridge. Yes, she agreed. And now, with this Davidson Foundation initiative, perhaps we can demonstrate that integration more explicitly. As we resumed walking, a comfortable silence fell between us. The distance that had separated us for years hadn't completely disappeared. We were still two strong-willed women with different approaches to problem-solving. But the antagonism had transformed into something approaching mutual respect, even collaboration. You know, my mother said as we reached the edge of the park, the Mid-Autumn Festival dinner is still happening at my house next month. After today's news, you'll be the guest of honor whether you attend or not. I laughed. Will Cousin Peter still try to claim he offered to invest in MedBridge early on? Undoubtedly. And your Aunt May will suddenly discover she always thought technology was the future of medicine. We shared a knowing smile at our family's predictable behavior. I'll be there, I promised, with charts and metrics to silence any remaining critics. There won't be many of those left, my mother said, with unexpected warmth. Not after today. As we parted ways, she to her hotel, I to my apartment, I realized that the public offering had marked more than MedBridge's transition to a publicly traded company. It had also publicly affirmed the legitimacy of the path I had chosen, not just to investors or the business community, but to my family, and most importantly, to my mother. The journey wasn't complete. MedBridge still had ambitious goals to achieve as a public company. The Davidson Foundation initiative was just taking shape. My relationship with my mother would continue to evolve, with inevitable complications and occasional tensions. But standing at the intersection of Broadway and 23rd Street, watching my mother's taxi disappear into the New York traffic, I felt a sense of alignment I had never experienced before. A harmony between my professional ambitions and personal relationships, between my rebellious departure from medicine and my continued commitment to healthcare, between my father's technological legacy and my mother's medical one. 4 years after walking away from the path that had been laid out for me since childhood, I had built not just a successful company, but a bridge between seemingly opposite worlds. And in doing so, I had found a way to honor both my parents' legacies while creating something uniquely my own. 1 year after MedBridge's successful IPO, I found myself standing in the familiar entryway of my mother's Boston home, surrounded by the festive decorations of the annual Mid-Autumn Festival family gathering. The company had grown beyond even our ambitious projections, now valued at over $2.3 billion, with operations expanding across 3 continents. The chorus of greetings that met me when I entered was dramatically different from the whispered judgments that had kept me away for years. Aunt May rushed over immediately. "Eliza, there's our tech genius," she exclaimed, embracing me with newfound enthusiasm. "I was just telling everyone about my telehealth appointment using MedBridge last week. Absolutely revolutionary." I suppressed a smile, remembering how she had once dismissed technology as impersonal and cold compared to traditional medicine. Now she wore an Apple Watch and tracked her steps religiously. Cousin Peter hovered nearby, clearly waiting for his opportunity to rewrite history. "Those stock options are performing brilliantly," he announced, as though we had some long-standing investment relationship. "Always knew you were onto something special. Did you, Peter?" My mother appeared beside me, eyebrow raised in that characteristic expression of skepticism I'd inherited from her. "That's not how I remember your comments at the last reunion." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, you know, we all have our moments of doubt." My mother exchanged a knowing glance with me. A small, private communication between us that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. Our shared BridgeMed Global initiative had created a new foundation for our relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than expectation and rebellion. "Come," she said, guiding me away from the opportunistic relatives. "There's someone I want you to meet." In the study, the same room where she had once told me not to come back if I left medical school, stood a young woman in her 20s, looking somewhat out of place among the family photos and medical textbooks. "This is Lin Wei," my mother introduced us. "She's a brilliant medical student who's developed a remote diagnostic platform for rural communities in China. I thought you two might have something to discuss." I extended my hand, immediately interested. "It's great to meet you, Lin. Are you using computer vision for preliminary diagnostics?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, combined with simplified protocols that can be administered by community health workers with minimal training. But I'm struggling with the implementation framework." As we dove into technical details, I caught my mother watching us with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of pride, satisfaction, and something like wonder. She had not only accepted my path, but was now actively connecting me with young innovators following similar trajectories. Later, as the family gathered around the dining table laden with traditional dishes, my Uncle David raised his glass. "A toast to the Chen family achievements this year. To Diana's groundbreaking research publication, to Michael's new partnership, and of course to Eliza's remarkable success with MedBridge and the Davidson Foundation initiative." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional accomplishment. The validation wasn't about the stock price or media attention. It was about finding harmony between the values my mother had instilled in me and the unique path I had forged. After dinner, I found a quiet moment with my mother on the back porch. The autumn air crisp around us as we sipped tea beneath strings of lanterns illuminating the garden. "That student Lin," I said. "She reminds me of myself a few years ago, caught between medicine and technology." My mother nodded. "When I met her at a conference, I immediately thought of you. But unlike my response to your journey, I'm trying to help her navigate both worlds rather than forcing a choice." "You're becoming a regular tech advocate," I teased, gently. "Hardly," she countered with a small smile. "But I've learned that innovation takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest contributions come from those who don't follow traditional paths." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sounds of family conversation floating through the open windows. "I found something while organizing my office last week," my mother said, reaching into her pocket. She handed me a faded photograph, my father and me when I was about 10, huddled over his computer as he showed me how to write my first lines of code. "He always said you had his mind for systems," she continued softly. "I was too focused on my own vision for your future to appreciate what he saw in you." I traced the edge of the photograph, memories flooding back. "He would have loved MedBridge. He would have been its first investor," my mother agreed, "and its most enthusiastic user. Your father was always complaining about healthcare inefficiencies, long before it became your mission." The realization that I had unconsciously carried forward my father's frustrations and vision alongside my mother's commitment to healthcare struck me profoundly. I wasn't just my mother's daughter or my father's daughter. I was the unique synthesis of both their influences, expressed in my own distinct way. "You know," my mother said, gazing out at the garden, "when I told everyone you had failed at life, at that reunion, I wasn't just wrong about your future success. I was wrong about what success even means." I turned to look at her, surprised by this level of reflection. I defined success so narrowly: prestige, stability, following established paths, she continued. "But you've shown me that real success is about impact, about building something meaningful that reflects your unique capabilities." "We're not so different in our core values," I observed. "We both want to improve healthcare. We just approach it differently." "Different methods, same mission," she agreed, echoing the tagline we'd developed for BridgeMed Global. As the evening wound down and family members began to depart, I found myself lingering, reluctant to end this moment of harmony. The journey, From being dismissed as a failure to creating a partnership with my mother had been neither straight nor easy, but standing here now, it felt right. Not perfect, but authentic and meaningful. Same time next month for the Davidson Foundation board meeting? My mother confirmed as I prepared to leave. Yes, I nodded. And don't forget, you promised to review those implementation protocols for the Southeast Asia launch. Already completed, she replied with characteristic efficiency. With several suggestions your technical team might find useful. I smiled, recognizing that some things never changed. My mother would always be thorough, exacting, and ahead of schedule. But other things had transformed completely. Her perspective on my choices, our professional relationship, and most importantly, our understanding of each other. Walking to my car beneath the star-filled Boston sky, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with stock prices or media validation. The real success wasn't that my company had been featured on CNN, while my mother criticized me at a family reunion. The real success was that we had both grown enough to build something meaningful together, a bridge between our worlds that might help heal not just our relationship, but healthcare systems. Globally, different methods, same mission. Not a bad legacy for the daughter who supposedly failed at life. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe. And hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.